My name is Tom Cross. I'm a Vietnamese American film editor living in Los Angeles, California.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for coming on. And I just want to get this out of the way. You are probably the first Vietnamese to have won an Academy Award, an Oscar in our community, right?
I I might be. I've heard that from some people, and I'm always afraid to claim that myself. I almost feel like I don't have the right to claim it myself. So thank you for for claiming that momentarily for me, if that is in fact true. That part is very overwhelming to me, to ponder that, to think about that. And beforehand, before I was fortunate enough to win an Academy Award, I never really gave much thought about what it meant to represent in a way. I certainly had and have complicated feelings about where I'm from and my background and my parents and me being Vietnamese American, Amerasian. What does that mean? Which is why we're here, why we're talking. I feel like, but in terms of representing, I never really gave it any thought until that happened, and then all of a sudden, this was kind of, for better or worse, mostly for better, like sort of thrust into my world and into my consciousness. And it's something that, I think about constantly now, whereas before I didn't think about it really at all.
I took the measures to check online and ask people who have encyclopedic knowledge, like my buddy Anderson Lay, and
Yeah.
we came to the conclusion. Ki Huy Quan is the first Vietnamese born to have won the Oscar, but you're the first Vietnamese American or Vietnamese person of descent to win an Oscar, and that's a major deal. And I debate about how much time I'm going to spend on the actual winning of that and the
Yeah.
representation and the actual technical side of editing and what that. So I'm going to try to go for all of it in
I
this.
love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I feel like, welcome to the rabbit hole, right? I mean, this is, we're gonna need another bunch of sessions, Ken, to get to the bottom of all this.
And I welcome it. And first of all, before we start, I want to shout out to Dawn, who made that introduction to us.
Yeah.
And Dawn's so lovely. She's followed up so many times about having the interview with you. So thank you, Dawn.
Yes, thank you, Duan. I mean, Duan is we're speaking about Duan Wang, who is the documentary filmmaker, who did this amazing documentary, Oh Saigon, um, and is currently working on another project and works on other projects. And yeah, I mean, her work is a real inspiration to me personally, and also, I mean, just being her friend and colleague, and uh, I've really, it's sort of invited me to think about, um, you know, your question, which is, what does it mean to be Vietnamese? And I feel like I always have very complex and complicated things going on in my brain, you know. I'll just say today, now at, September 8th, at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I think it means that I'm part of a long list of amazing people who have a long history. It's an honor to be a part of that group. Um, and it's something that, I almost feel like, even though, you know, I've been around for a long time, I almost feel like I just got invited into the group, or I'm new in some ways. And that's part of my complicated, you know, relationship with it, but I see it as sort of a positive thing. And it's funny because, listening to you speak with other people on this program, I've heard a lot of amazing insights, a lot of amazing stories. And I think one podcast I was listening to made reference to, almost having an idealized view of what it means to be Vietnamese. And I think what was expressed was that, was that it's good to be careful and cautious about having too idealized view, like having it be a narrow runway in a way. That being Vietnamese is very complex, which certainly it is. Um, you know, I don't want to say I have a reductive view of it, but I just say that I pull out a couple things almost just as a North Star for me as I try to navigate my own identity, which is an ongoing thing. Again, I say like what it means today, but it changes, it evolves all the time, and certainly from the very beginning, it was a challenging thing.
What
But
what made it so complicated for you? What makes it so complicated for you?
well, like I was born in this country. My parents met in Vietnam in the mid 1960s. Um, my dad had been in the military. He had served. He was a little too old to serve in Vietnam, so he served in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Um, and so by the time the mid 1960s came around, he was in the first Peace Corps. He was continuing similar work. He had a grant from the US government to be a swim coach in Vietnam, and other places, like he went to Senegal. So he was in Vietnam to kind of, um, in the heady days of the early 60s and the mid 60s, he was in Vietnam to help spread, Western culture, and try to be supportive in that way, be a supportive American. And so he was a swim coach in Vietnam. He was in Saigon, and he met my mom, who was a librarian at this American library. I think it was called the Abraham Lincoln Library or something like that in Saigon. And my mom was also an artist. She was a painter, and there was an exhibit somewhere in Saigon of some artwork, and hers was, I don't know if it was her exhibit, but her artwork was there. My dad bought one of her paintings and then asked her out, and they started dating. And then I don't know if this was in 65, might have been 65. In 1966, they got married. Kind of, I think in the summer of 66, they got married, and they left, I think in 1967, to go back to where my dad was from, which was Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where I was born. So I was born in the Midwest. And when I was about 5 or 6, we moved to upstate New York, Rochester, New York, home of Eastman Kodak. And that's where I grew up, in upstate New York. And I would say in both places, I did not know a lot of Vietnamese people. I mean, certainly my parents had friends. A lot of the families we connected with, besides relatives, and we didn't have any relatives very, very nearby in Milwaukee. So we connected with other families and couples. And I think all of them that I recall, the wives were Vietnamese and the husbands were white, for lack of a better way, more specific way of putting it. So they connected with similar type couples. And while there were Vietnamese folk festivals that we would participate in and attend in Milwaukee, and while the families all like loved Vietnamese food, loved eating pho, loved, like all the women would cook. They knew how to cook, and we would all eat. I did not eat Vietnamese food when I grew up. I mean, I was from a very early age, I was intent on just being kind of the American kid, and and I don't think I made any big decision. That was just kind of the natural. That was like the laws of following the laws of gravity a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I went to school where there were no Vietnamese children. Um, Early on, I don't even know if there were any Asian children. I don't remember. Um, so, I really was just intent on fitting in and just become, just being like everyone else. And I have to say that, I spoke to my mom about this later. Not in any deep conversation, but I remember having casual conversations about it, about, keeping the culture and keeping the Vietnamese influence. And I think my mom's initial thought was that she didn't want to fight the laws of gravity in a way. I think she felt that, her country was had changed or was not the country she grew up in. And so I think it wasn't clear to her that we were ever going to return. And so um, this was the way things were going to be. This was our new life. We were going to, I mean, new to her and a change for her, but not for me. I mean, it was all I knew. And so, she fully embraced Midwest American cuisine, culture, whatever you want to call it. I grew up with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and all the Twinkies and that type of thing that all the other American kids sort of grew up with. So there was never any. She didn't push the culture, and outside of when I was very little, very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I remember learning how to count in Vietnamese. Like there were certain things
Yeah.
she would try to teach me with, but that disappeared very early on. And again, I always feel like it was it was my mom sort of following the laws of gravity as they existed at that time, at that place. And so all I knew was just being like an American kid. And that was pretty, that was challenging because and I've heard a lot of stories on your program here, sort of touching on things that are very familiar, and I totally identified with. But when we would see my Vietnamese relatives, I always felt like I was just kind of the white kid, and I didn't speak the language. I don't speak Vietnamese, outside of counting for when I take a photograph, Mo Kai Ba, like that's about it. But what I also remember is that, with my friends at school, they always just thought I was Asian, you
Oh,
know?
oh, yeah.
Yeah. But of course, no one really knew Vietnamese. Like, so it was always like, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Are you Korean? I mean, I don't think when I was a little kid, I don't think anyone arrived at Vietnamese, you
Right.
know? Even though the Viet the Vietnam War experience for this country was still very near because I grew up in the 1970s. It was still very, very much. I mean, we're still living off the fumes of that. Um, Strangely, people's consciousness of Vietnamese people was so non-existent, that people always pegged me as being Chinese, or but that's the funny thing, is that to my white friends I was Asian, and to my Vietnamese relatives I was white.
That is
So
a complicated place to be. That's a complicated. I mean, even for me,
yeah,
born in the United States, it's a
yeah,
complicated because sometimes it's either I'm fully American, fully Vietnamese, but I'm neither one of those as well. But I can't imagine being actually half white and half Vietnamese. That's even more
yeah,
perplexing. Yeah.
yeah. It was very odd. And I mean, my parents, my name is Tom Cross, but my parents gave me a Vietnamese name when I was born. My name is Min Tom.
Oh wow.
Um, and I think from a very early age, my parents would just refer to me as Tom, just Tom for short. It's the same name, Mintom, but they would always say Tom. And so I started going by that Tom, and I would, in school, when I was 5 years old or 6 years old and seven, I would write Tom, like that would be on my name, Tom, Tam, cross.
Oh,
And that was really ultimately problematic for a little kid just trying to fit in because no one knew how to pronounce Tom. Tom is Tom. It would be Tam,
right.
which was also challenging because that was Tam, or Tammy is the name of was the name of a girl, and so it was like a 6-year-old's nightmare.
Yeah, it's like
You
sounds
just
like a hot mess.
a total hot mess. And so eventually I asked my parents if I could change my name, because by that point I just went by Tom, and I just wanted to be Tom in a way that would not draw attention, to me. That was my biggest thing as a little kid, is I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to be like everyone else. Um, and the funny thing is that this is very interesting. When my family moved from the Midwest to upstate New York, we moved to Rochester. I grew up in a very Jewish community. A lot of my friends were Jewish, and I, in some ways, was more exposed
Yeah.
to that culture growing up than Vietnamese. So I grew up as a kid going to, my friends' bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and we observed all Jewish holidays, and it was amazing, and I loved that. I loved being in that. But I think at a certain age, I think I just wanted to be Jewish. And so again, for me, it was like following the laws of gravity, and just not wanting to stick out in a way or stand out, really just wanting to like be anonymous. And so I kept harassing and bothering my parents to change my name, and they always would kind of brush it off or whatever. And eventually, somewhere, I think entering into high school or something, they said, okay, if you really want to do it, we'll do it. And I ended up changing my name. What's really funny is I don't know whose idea it was, but I think of myself as Tom Cross. I'm Tom, because that's, again, different spelling, but that's what I've always been. And somehow, you know, we had to change my name to the sort of formal version of Tom, which is Thomas, which is fine, but it's not really the name
Yeah.
that. So to me, it's almost like I can laugh about it now. It's almost like a little bit of a cruel joke that, I'm Tom Cross, but then I have to, it's like Tom I like, but Thomas, so sometimes when I'm in a place where someone is looking at my license or my paperwork, they refer to me as Thomas. It always feels, like a little silly, anyways, so the other footnote to that is just that, even though I changed my name, I have a lot of family all over the place in different parts they've moved to different parts of the United States, some in France, other parts of Europe. And a lot of them, from back in the day, like still refer to me as Mintom.
Dumb. Wow.
Yeah. And I kind of love it. I mean, I think initially, I don't think it didn't, from them, it didn't bug me, but it was also like, it felt like more of they're using the old name. They don't know. But now I actually really love it. And it's almost like, it reminds me of that little bit, that character bit in Star Wars, where the first Star Wars, New Hope, where Luke Skywalker finds Ben Kenobi, and then he actually, it's revealed he goes by his old name, Obi-Wan, and so, having grown up in an era of Star Wars movies, I remember thinking, oh yeah, that's my old name from another life or something like that,
Yeah.
It's just
No,
wild.
such a cool journey. I mean, it's complicated, but it comes full circle. Today you love the name Mintam, and it's hard to go backwards and change it professionally, but it's still part of the genetic your DNA. Now,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who knows? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it feels maybe I'll change it, but it also, I say that knowing that it feels a little silly to, I don't know. I feel a little like, oh, we're really going to do this. We're really going to go back and forth. Like we're going to keep changing it or something. But anyways, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, there was a time where it was, I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be that because that meant that the first day of school, when the teacher called the roll, she would he or she would mangle the name, would never pronounce it right. It would always be a big mess, unlike all the other kids. And I'd have to, raise my hand and correct everyone. And it was for like a 5, 6, 7 year old, 8 year old, it was like a nightmare.
Yeah. When did you develop a love for film? Did you have it early on in your life?
Very early, very early on. I mean, I just loved watching movies. I have a memory of the first movie I ever saw was when my parents were watching a James Bond movie on television. And I was probably 5 years old. And I have distinct memories of scenes from that movie. It was the movie Thunderball with Sean Connery, an early James Bond movie. And yeah, and I always, Sean Connery in that silver Aston Martin,
Yeah.
have strong memories of that. So I grew up loving those movies that I would see on TV, and then later I would see them in the movie theater. I was a kid who grew up in the 70s, so Star Wars loomed extremely large for people in that generation. So I just loved going to the movies, and my mom was an artist, painter, sculptor, printmaker. So she always encouraged creative work, always encouraged me drawing and doing creative things. Um, and my dad, I wouldn't call him a cinephile, but he's always loved movies. And so as a family, the three of us, I'm an only child, the three of us would go out to the movies all the time. We'd watch movies on TV together. And it was my dad who really started to nurture this idea of filmmaking to me. And somewhere in high school, I think I was, as we entered into the age of renting videotapes and stuff like that and renting movies, I would often hang out with my friends and we just rent a pile of movies and just watch these movies. And my dad, I think, took notice, and he would buy me books on filmmaking, and there weren't that many back in the day, but he would buy me film books, and he would talk about movies he remembered seeing that he loved, like Alfred Hitchcock movies. And so I would say from an early age, I always loved the movies, avid moviegoer. And then, that entertainment, that thrill, evolved into kind of a real interest in terms of how movies are made in high school. Like that's where I started really getting into starting to explore the nuts and bolts of it.
Yep.
And that led to going to film school, which my parents fully encouraged and lovingly sent me through. But it was early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Now, did you start out wanting to be an editor or director or writer?
I started out wanting to make my own films. So when I went to film school, I wanted to be, I wanted to be a director. And going to the school I went to, Purchase College, or it's known as Purchase College now. It was State University of New York at Purchase, SUNY Purchase. It was a film conservatory where they would try to teach you all the different disciplines of filmmaking. So you would study writing, you'd study acting, you would study cinematography, editing. And I found that there were a lot of parts of the process that, I didn't gravitate toward, and parts of the process that I did. And editing was something I really enjoyed quite a bit. And then when I graduated, I still think I thought that I might want to make my own films, but I had to start working. And after Purchase, I moved in with a couple buddies into New York City, because the school was maybe about an hour away from New York. So that was the logical next step for a lot of us. And so we moved to New York, and a bunch of my film buddies and I just tried to, pound the pavement and get work. And through some connections and the kindness of some strangers, I landed an assistant editing job at a commercial editing company, which is something I really wanted. I still thought I was going to make my own movies, but I also really wanted to get a job in editing, and that kind of started my career. And then once I really got into it, this interest in making my own films sort of subsided a little bit, and it was, I don't know, my passion just became, how do I collaborate with filmmakers to help them tell their stories? I love putting pieces together. I love collaborating with people, so rather than how do I get my vision on the screen, it was more like how do I collaborate with people to help them, get their vision on the screen in the best possible way.
There's three parts to this whole filmmaking stuff: the writing, which is the ideation, and then the actual making of it, and production, directing, and then there's you. You're the final stop. You're the guy
Right.
who really makes that movie turn into that gold.
Right. Maybe, or gold or something else, depends on what it is, right? Yeah, I mean, it's uh, I just, I think it's such a beautiful craft. It's a beautiful film discipline, for those that are interested in such things, like it's we start I start putting the pieces together as soon as they start filming. That's kind of the standard way. Has been the standard way for years in Hollywood. You try to keep up to camera, and that way you can kind of inform the filmmakers as we're going along how things are going. Are there any problems? Do we need to reshoot something? Would there be some other piece that'd be helpful to pick up? But it's kind of an insurance policy in a
Yeah.
way while they're shooting. And I love that. And that's during that time, it changed. Editing changes. People have this idea about film editing is one person in a dark room, and you have to like working in a solitary way. That is part of the job, but it's really an incomplete vision of what a feature film editor does. I mean, we work autonomously during filming because the directors are usually too busy to come in to work with you. So we are on our own based on notes from the set. We put things together. But to say I'm working autonomously, that's not even accurate either. The director's not with me, but I'm with a crew of assistant editors and other post professionals who I rely on, who help me do what I'm doing. We're working all together to get this together.
What
And
what makes you pick a project?
That's a good question. And I've tried to be, I've been very, after I've had a couple, I was lucky to have a couple hits. It's enabled me to have that luxury in a way to start picking projects. I mean, I just out of the gate, I would say I look at who's directing. It's filmmakers usually. I mean, I read the script. I see who's going to be in the movie. What's the story? That's really important to me. But I think above all else, it's director. It's the filmmaker. Like I remember getting a call. This was shortly after Whiplash, when Whiplash played the Sundance Film Festival. I can't remember if it had been released. It was certainly before the awards and all that stuff, but maybe it had been theatrically released. It was starting to garner some heat and attention. And I got a call from a producer asking me if I wanted to work on a David O. Russell movie. And I'm a big fan. I love Three Kings. I love Silver Linings Playbook. I mean, all his movies. And so to get a call to say, hey, we loved your work on Whiplash. We want you, would you be interested in working for this amazing filmmaker? I mean, that was the first one of those big calls I
Yeah.
got. And
That was
that was,
for Joy, right?
That was for joy, and that was like that was a dream. I
Yeah.
was like, and also I was petrified because I'd never done anything that big. David is a very his work is kind of monumental, and he's a larger than life personality, at least in what I'd seen publicly and stuff like that, and interviews and things like that. I was intimidated,
Yeah.
but I was like, I need to, this is the sort of call that you're supposed to answer when you get, this is one of those Hollywood dream scenarios.
Yeah.
So you gotta leap at it. And I loved working on that movie. It was really challenging. It was a test, but I was not the only editor. There were three other editors on the movie. I loved working with them. I loved working with David, but that, being able to, I don't know, I guess the thing, this is what I was going to say is, I was telling an editor friend about it. I got a call, David O. Russell's movie, and he asked me like, that sounds amazing. How is the script? And I was like, I have no idea. I haven't read it because I hadn't been sent it. So I said yes to the job without reading the script because I didn't need to, because it's David, so I'd say filmmaker,
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense because they're going to make the right decisions.
Yeah, or that you'll, I don't know, it's like, I still think that even though I've been doing this a long time, I was an assistant editor for almost 20 years before I got my editing breaks. And then my success as an editor has been very rapid. But that was only after, slaving away for.
Yeah, it's like overnight success that took 20 years, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I guess I want to, like, I always feel like I learn something on every job. So in a way, I'm still learning. It's like on the job training. I'm still learning while I'm working. And if I can learn from the best storytellers or the storytellers that interest me, then that feels like that's a really great path.
I understand the process of creativity, of ideation, of putting things together and editing and rewriting. But how do you know when things are right? How do you know when they're finished?
That's really tough. I mean, I forget who said it, and I'm going to be mangling and paraphrasing wildly, but you often hear that films are never really finished; they're abandoned, and to a certain extent, I guess that's true. I mean, it's almost always a race to the finish, whether you're making a release date or just that the studio only has so much in their budget, so much in their coffers for you to work up until. So it's always like a rush, no matter, I mean, the small movies like Whiplash, that was the fastest schedule I ever had. So that was definitely a rush because we were trying to make the Sundance Film Festival. Yeah. But even a big movie like James Bond, with a huge budget and stuff like that, even that was like kind of a race to the finish, So how do you know when it's done? I mean, like when I work on these movies of Damien Chazelle, Whiplash, La La Land, First Man, Babylon, I always feel like, and it was even true of Whiplash where we had no time, it always feels like we turned over every stone, so that's how I'm able to detach by the end. If I feel like we've truly vetted everything on the movie, which we do, which I always feel like with Damien's movies, then that helps comfort you, I guess, for like birthing this thing and putting it out into the world, because otherwise that would be, are we doing the right thing? How will we ever know? And a method to help us with that is that, we have friends and family screenings. We organize screenings in our editing room, but also organize, we'll screen the movie in screening rooms or theaters on the studio lot, wherever we're working, and we'll invite friends and family and of course our collaborators just to watch and not only get get advice from them, but just to feel it in the room with the people. That's one of the biggest things you'll hear, I think, film editors talk about is learning so much from watching a rough cut with people. Um, even if you don't talk to them, even if they answer questionnaires,
Yeah.
just that feeling, like you yourself as an editor, as a filmmaker, you get antsy when something feels like it's too long and it's boring, it's dragging. I mean, you want to just die, And then similarly, when there's something that is really, it's the joke is killing, or it's like really, something's really working well. You want to milk that moment. Oh, we could embellish that a little bit more because this part is working amazingly. So, but that's like with an audience.
This relationship in film is very collaborative, and you have found this connection with Damien. How did that come about? And I don't mean the meeting of Damien Chazelle. I mean the formation of that bond. Did you sort of know right after Whiplash? I mean, how did it feel? Because Scorsese and Spielberg, all
Alma.
these guys
Yeah.
have their guys and
Yeah.
or their gals in Spielberg's
Yeah.
situation, right? And how do you know that this is going to be the team that you're basically moving on in life
Yeah.
for forever almost?
Yeah. I mean, I think early on, when we met, I mean, we hit it off from the very beginning, just in terms of our interests. We liked a lot of the same movies. I guess it was the conversations. We would talk creatively about movies, like movies we liked.
Yeah.
Before we had made anything together, it was like, what movie? Oh, I love this movie. I love that. And we found that we appreciated a lot of the same directors and a lot of the same movies. And then we would start talking about scenes, and we literally start talking about editing, like frames. Oh, I loved it in this movie when it looked like they took a frame out for more impact, or and then I would talk about things that I thought was inspiring, like when someone put a flash frame in something to give impact. Like, so we're literally talking about construction, getting into the minutia. And so it starts with these creative conversations where, like, wow, we're on the same page, and then that sort of expanded into what we were doing. We could take that language, those conversations, and apply them to what we were working on. So I would say early on that happened, and then that just continues. And I think a big thing, I mean, I guess with a collaborator, either you hit it off or you don't. You connect or you don't connect. Or there obviously there's areas of gray in between. But
Yeah.
like, I think with a big thing is just how you communicate, how you speak, and that's in these conversations. That's what Damien and I have in the editing room, and that's not everyone's style.
Yeah.
Everyone's style is not necessarily to talk it out. Damien and I talk it out. So and we do it in such a way that there's trust, so that um, you know, he's not afraid to pitch me an idea. What if we do this?
Yeah.
And I think for creative people, that's shouldn't be taken for granted. That's hard to pitch something, and because you're afraid that you're gonna pitch the wrong thing, or you're gonna offend someone, or you're gonna look like an idiot,
Yeah.
and then someone's going to completely lose faith. Oh, you want to do that? Why would you ever want to do that? They're going to start distrusting your taste and your judgment. And so, but somehow very early on, Damien and I established a rapport where when we get into the editing room, that's this safe place, a sanctuary, and we can just pitch ideas. And sometimes we'll be talking about a scene, and it'll require some new dialogue, some ADR, some off-screen lines or something. And or maybe it's not even, maybe it's just rearranging scenes, and to map it out, we'll either talk it through, or sometimes he'll get on a laptop and he'll start writing it, and we'll sit next to each other and we'll be just talking, and he'll be he's such a brilliant writer. So I feel like I'm in a place, I feel like very honored. I'm where I'm sitting next to him. Literally, we're kind of just conversing and he's sort of transcribing what we're talking about. And so I think that's what makes those collaborations work, and what feeds them and makes them last a long time. So when you talk about Martin Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker, or Steven Spielberg and Michael Kahn, I mean, I've never met Thelma. I've met Michael Kahn once. Don't know him really, but my educated guess is that when they're in their respective editing rooms, it's a free dialogue, where the filmmaker and the editor aren't afraid to pitch things, or are courageous enough to pitch 9 out of 10 things, maybe. I think that's what it is. I think that's it at its core. Art is, like it really takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there, whatever it is you're doing, whether it's movies or whatever it is, music, visual arts, like to put yourself out there. And movies is something, especially I feel like if your movie is going to be on the 50-foot screen
Yeah.
and you're screening it for critics and audiences, I mean, I know filmmakers always talk about this, feeling very naked,
Naked.
and yeah, I remember doing a first cut for a filmmaker early on, and he came in to look at my first cut of it, an editor's cut or first cut, and he saw it and he had notes, and he's complimented me, but it was like we both agreed, okay, now it's a starting point, and he wanted to speak freely, and he started kind of, speaking honestly about the issues with the movie, not with my work, but and he prefaced it by saying, okay, look, you've seen me with my clothes off. So, I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna speak freely,
Yeah.
and so, you know, so as an editor, if there's anything I can do to, um, help create that safe space and um, protect what that artist wants to do. I feel like that's my job. That's what I always try to remember. So I never want to throw cold water on an artist's ideas or anything like that. I want to do the opposite.
Other than modern technology and filmmaking entering into, this digital space, how has storytelling for you as an editor changed much? Or is it sort of like a good story is going to be a good story, and the way you approach it is going to still be the same regardless of technology or any modern sort of effects or anything?
Right. I mean, I think it's kind of, I think at its core, storytelling is the same. It's about, in my view, it's about telling a story and constructing it in a way, articulating it in a way that is accessible to the widest possible audience. To me,
Hmm.
that's what movies are. Um, and I say that knowing that there's obviously shades in between. There's great cinematic work that is very specific, that and when I say appeal to a wide audience, I think, you know, we see movies all the time where our biggest complaint might be how watered down it is, and how much of a sellout this
Yeah.
movie is, because it's pandering to a wide audience. So obviously there's degrees of nuance, within all of that. But generally, when I work on a movie, I want to build it in a way, or help build it in a way that really articulates the emotion, articulates the action in a way that more people will understand it when they see it on the big screen. And so, I mean, I think all of that is kind of the same as it ever was, in a way. You know, in the early days where it's, film, and when there was no sound, and then when there was sound, and then, all those technological advances, I think it's really all still storytelling.
Yeah.
Um, all that being said, how we construct the movies and how we shoot them and how we edit them, that has changed, and that means that the aesthetics have evolved. The way we put scenes together is a little different. We can, we can do things that I can, as a film editor today, I can manipulate the image in a way that film editors 20 years ago couldn't do, or 50 years ago they couldn't do. Does it mean that the movies 20 years ago or 50 years ago are less effective or less emotional? No, I don't think that. I
Yeah.
don't think that
Yeah.
means that at all. I think I can watch It's a Wonderful Life and be choked up by the end. Similarly, I can watch a movie, made yesterday and get choked up, or find it funny, or be thrilled. And so, it's an interesting thing, because watching old movies, I love movies. I've always loved movies. I love watching old movies. Um, there's something that happens for me when I watch an old movie. My brain automatically calibrates to um, to the time period that the movie was made, the context,
Yeah.
and so automatically that happens. So if I'm watching an old movie, um, I usually don't think about how old fashioned it is or how dated it is. I just kind of get into the story. If it's done well, I just get into the story, and I can find myself more moved by movies, older Hollywood movies, for example. Um, Sometimes I find very moving. And maybe part of it is because the style was different. In some cases, the characters are drawn more broadly, and maybe that means I can project specificity onto them. Whereas ironically, portrayals that might be more specific today, I might find emotional, but maybe less emotional, because
Wow.
it's
Huh.
drawn so specifically, and I project less of what I want to project onto it, maybe. But the one thing I think that does, it's very interesting, because this takes it back around to our collective topic here. Um, and when I see older movies, and I talk about how I don't usually think that they're dated, when I see cultural things that are in older movies, I'm more aware of that now, and those are the places where I think in my head, wow, that is really dated. You couldn't do that,
Hmm.
today. And I know I was listening to, and I've had conversations with Dawn about this, and I was listening to your podcast, and she made mention of movies that she grew up watching, like Breakfast at Tiffany's and stuff like that. Mickey Rooney playing an Asian character, caricature, and yeah, that stuff is really, I find really difficult to see. Um, but it's interesting because, you know, I did not really recognize that.
Wow.
I think Duan talked about recognizing it right away, that gave her feelings right away, that
Yeah.
she didn't it made her uncomfortable or made her sad, or she had feelings about it, which makes a lot of sense. When I grew up, I really came at it from a different perspective, and so the first R-rated movie, my parents were usually pretty protective of me going to what I was seeing in the theater. I was not allowed to see R-rated movies as a kid, and my parents didn't take me to R-rated movies. They made an exception for a couple early movies. The first one being Apocalypse Now, which my parents took me to on its initial release, because it was a topic that was considered
Yeah.
important at the time. And I saw that movie. I was 9 years old, and it had this immense impact on me. It was this extremely powerful movie, um, and uh, and I love the movie to this day. But clearly, if you know the movie, it is it is a story told from a certain point of view, and the Vietnam War and the country, the people, that's just kind of a backdrop
Right.
to this other story. And I really, you know, it's a much more complicated, me looking at those movies today is much more complex than it was back then. I mean, I really almost like saw it through what I would perceive to be, my dad's point of view. Not that he expressed an
Right.
overt point of view, but I saw it from the point of view of an American, of a white person, And so I was much more, um, you know, fascinated by, what the GIs were wearing, what beer they drank, what their methods were, how did they live their lives? Those characters, those are the ones that this is what I'm supposed to be watching. And then other movies that, I mean, we talk about war movies. I mean, Full Metal Jacket,
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick movie. I loved that movie when it came out. I love Stanley Kubrick. I loved the movie when it came out. I still love the movie, but there's things in it, caricatures and things like that, that I have a hard time watching, and that I think about now in a way that I did not think about when it came out, because when it came out, I was really looking at it from a different perspective, and I don't think the characters on the screen, I did not connect
Yeah.
with my mother, with my family, with my people in a way, that I do. I do, because when I see some of those characters, I immediately think of my mom, and those characterizations of my mom, the real people, like those things I can't reconcile, because they're completely different things, and that's what makes it challenging to watch.
And that is such an interesting topic today, because if you really think about this idea of wokeness, this idea that we have to pay attention to the voices that are not being heard, this is relatively new,
Mm,
but it is something that is almost mandatory for Americans to kind of wake up to, because these voices that have not been able to sort of speak their mind on screen, or be projections of a smaller, more marginalized community. It's this tug of war that, so many people in the Vietnamese community get annoyed at this idea of wokeness, but at the same time, we are, as a community in America, as a total population, we need to be more energized and really awaken to the fact that there are like these other viewpoints that affect the way America sees Vietnamese people. And I think that there's always a struggle within our own community. The complexity of that is, we can go on for hours to talk about that. That's a
yeah.
whole thing. And this idea of wokeness is so important. But I get why it bothers a lot of conservative Vietnamese, older first generation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's, what you're describing. It's like we see Full Metal Jacket, when it came out, and then 20 years later, 15 years later, when you look at it again, it takes on a whole new
Totally. And yeah, you're right. It's a deep topic. This will be part two or
yeah.
whatever. We'll have to do part two, but just to touch on it briefly, I mean, you know, I think this idea of wokeness is it's hard in some ways. You have to get past, um, how the term has been politicized, and
Yes.
it's very messy right now. But the way I see it in terms of representation is when movies, when Hollywood, the Hollywood system would make movies, they really wanted their movies again to appeal to a wide audience. How
Yeah.
can we make this? How can we tell this story that's universal from our point of view, Universal playing to the room as we see it. And so that's who they made movies for. Now I think that the way I understand it, I understand why people can be angered about all this wokeness that's imposed on our society and on artwork, because now you have to be PC and you have to check off all these boxes. And yes, there is a cynical way that you could look at art and look at movies and say, oh my God, that's just that's a cash grab, like they just like cast this character or created this character just to check off a box so they could make more money. And I think I think that does happen. I think there is truth to that. At the same time, I think you can't overstate, the importance of representation.
Yeah.
And if we've learned anything in recent days, we've learned that, representation, our ideas of different cultures and different peoples, like how different people misunderstand different people. I mean, I think you can make a great argument for the importance of representing and putting out visions of who we really are, whatever we are, and so I think, you see it in the Black community when, say, for example, Marvel released Black Panther, you can see, you can see how much that, affected people, and how there were all sorts of people who were happy that they were finally seeing representation. They were finally seeing characters that were positive characters that look like themselves. I mean, I don't think you can overstate how powerful that is, and how much that's needed in a way. And so yeah, you can look at it cynically, and there are examples like that, but I also think that there's the flip side to it as well, which is that I don't think not only do I not think there's anything wrong with wanting to tell stories from different points of views from the actual people. I think it's kind of essential,
We need
and
it.
we need it. And
We need it.
what's very interesting is we, going back to your grand question, what does it mean to be Vietnamese? I mean, it's something I meditate on all the time. It evolves. All that being said, I have my own family. I'm married. I have kids, and the whole lot of us are made up of different people, different backgrounds. I mean, there's Puerto Rican, there's Black, there's Mexican, there's, and so what's really interesting for me is, as I try to evolve and navigate what it means to me as a parent and family member, I'm also navigating, I feel the need to navigate how do I help, my family navigate the world, being Black, being Mexican, being all these things. And so it's very interesting to sort of not only meditate on my own stuff specifically, but also feeling the need to almost like do my homework on, so that I can help other ends of my family in a way, so.
I debated this and had to have a conversation with another person that, I'm really in awe of the Oscar experience for you. And I was like, oh my God, should I be talking about this? But I'm like, this is like one of the biggest questions that I have, like, to be nominated, to get that call or that letter.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? And then finally getting into the award show and then finally winning it. Can you walk me through that whole journey?
Yeah. I can. I'll try to. I mean, it's such a huge. It was. I used to watch the Oscars with my mom and dad. We used to watch it on TV, and there was something I always really loved about that, because not only did I love movies, but in a way, this award show on TV, this silly pompous award show with the celebrities and the movie stars. That I think was really important for my experience because it it was something it came in a form on TV, in a form that people could understand, like my parents could understand it. The fact that it was a big event on TV also was a stamp of approval for movies. And so there's prestige, even though it's very glitzy, and there obviously are superficial elements to it. Still, I couldn't deny back then that there was this prestige to it, and I think when it came to me pursuing filmmaking, um, that validated movies in a way that not only my parents, because I said my mom is an artist, and they always nurtured that, but just in a way that they could express to other family members, the feeling being that, and these other family members are so far away from the movie business,
Yeah.
But everyone knows what an Oscar is, or they have a vague idea of what it is. It's that, so it was very validating, and but of course, again, I felt very far away from ever winning one or ever being considered for one or anything like that. I mean, it was certainly like a pipe dream, a dream, but like a pipe dream. And but it wasn't like I was working my whole career toward it. It was
Right.
just this. So I mean, for me, it was such a momentous thing to be nominated because I had kind of worked away, for 20 years as an assistant editor. And I just started editing. Whiplash was my third feature film that I did as an editor. And the first two I was really proud of, but no one saw the movies. And 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 I had to, when I did the editing, I no one I still wasn't accepted as an editor, so I had to go back to assistant editing, to try to make ends meet. And finally, with Whiplash, when I got nominated, I mean, it was the stamp of approval that basically jump started my editing career. I mean, I
Wow.
was, yeah, like, so it was, so because people asked me, did that really do anything? I mean, it literally was life changing, because as soon as I got nominated, all of a sudden, um, a person like me who had no body of work as an editor, all of a sudden people knew my name. And I remember I grew up, as I've described, loving movies. I'm also kind of an editor buff. Like I sort of, I
Yeah.
had I knew editors' names. I idolize editors. When I was nominated, there was an Academy event, a dinner that all the nominees were invited to, and at the dinner were the Oscar nominated editors, five of us, or I think it was six of us, because two editors for one movie, so six of us. And there were a room of important Academy editors from the Academy branch, legendary editors, and one of them was a legendary editor from Apocalypse Now, Richard Marx, who also worked on Godfather 2, and someone, an idol, right? When I walked into that room, we didn't know each other. He greeted me by name because he knew the work. So that's what happened when I was nominated. Um, when, I mean, I don't even know how to get to winning, but I think it was like, hearing my name being called. I mean, it was like this out of body experience. And I had, I was told by another editor who gave me advice that I spoke to way before this. He said, practice your speech. You'll hear, as you get nominated and you go through the award circuit, people tell you, practice your speech, rehearse it or whatever. And so I had a little speech or whatever that I was like rehearsed in my head and stuff like that. And somehow something clicked in. I walked up there and I clicked in and I just said these things, and I don't know, like it was out of body in a
Yeah.
way. And and I don't know, what the other thing I remember is after being nominated was you know, I started getting nominated for other things before the Oscar. I got nominated for a British Academy Award, a BAFTA, which was an amazing deal. And then nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. And, you know, I had just signed with an agent. I just got an agent right ahead of this, right after Whiplash played Sundance. So that was new to me. And we were, you know, there were a couple sort of independent movies that I was in the running for. And I got nominated for BAFTA. And we were, you know, he was kind of fielding these calls for these indie movies that I was excited to do. And I think it was the day after I got nominated for an Oscar, you know, I called him up. I said this, you know, we talked about, oh, it's great, you know, and I said, well, what do I do about, what about this movie and this movie that do I, when am I going to meet on this? And he said, no, 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 we're not doing those movies anymore. Like I had been nominated for all these other things and we were still doing it, but it was the Oscar that was such a different distinction, a whole other level. He's like, no, 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 we're not doing those things. Meaning we're aiming, we're
Another
going to
level
shoot the
now.
moon on this. We're aiming much higher for this. And then the next thing I ended up doing was David O. Russell's movie
Yeah.
Joy. But yeah, so that was sort of this thing that all of a sudden I'm thrown into the stratosphere. And then after, you know, I mean the thing about the Oscar is all of a sudden, you know, in terms of me trying to make it as an editor and establish a name, all of a sudden, you know, I had a name, you know, and everyone knew it, and because everyone knew the movie. And so it was with one movie, with one experience, I established a whole career, you know. And obviously, you know, then the work starts, but
And
I
it's
was allowed to
crazy.
do that work.
It's crazy to think that for 20 years as an assistant editor, it's really not a career. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. It's like,
Yeah. Well, it certainly was. I was proud of all the work that I participated in. I like it was amazing. I there was it in some ways it was a great career. It was always, you know, kind of hand to mouth. It was always a hustle. You know, it's not. I wasn't an assistant that worked on huge movies. I worked on great things, but as an assistant, I didn't make tons of money. And so it was always a hustle. And and but then, you know, I remember my agent telling me, in the context of a very, we're talking about career and stuff like that, and early, you know, when Whiplash was starting to get heat, and he said, you know, he said he look if someone were to ask him, if he looked at my resume before Whiplash, if someone were to ask him, you know, is this guy going to go someplace? Is he going to do things? Is he going to be great? Is he going to? He would have said no. No, I don't see anything here that tells me this guy's going places, you know? And so that's what I try to tell like aspiring filmmakers and film editors, like it just takes one. You never know. You never know what is going to be your whiplash or whatever. Like there's Quentin Tarantino's editor, the late Sally Menke, used to advise up and coming editors. She used to say, you know, try to keep your overhead low so you can afford to do that pro bono movie or a low budget thing, because that could be your Reservoir Dogs, you know, which is the movie that
yeah,
catapulted her, you know. And I say something similar. I retell that little anecdote or whatever, and but I say something similar because, you know, I cut a little short film, which is how I connected with Damien Chazelle. We did the short film version of Whiplash, and then I was lucky enough to be able to do the feature, and then everything changed from there, you know. And you know, if it wasn't for the Oscar, I I would not have the career that I have had so far. I wouldn't have cut James Bond. I might not even have been able to cut La La Land, you know, just be only because I know my connection with Damien was, you know, we had a collaboration, but you know, with each of these movies, the movies
yeah,
get larger in scope and budget, and I am being, you know, given the keys to a bigger kingdom every time without having done it myself. I hadn't cut a movie the size of La La Land when I did it. So, you know, film studios are famously risk adverse. You know, they never want to entrust something to someone who hasn't done it before. So, but because I had won an Academy Award, that was enough validation.
Yeah.
That would, that was a credential that has protected me and helped me navigate all of those things. So that can't be overstated how much that has meant for my career. I think with each Oscar winner, it's probably different. Everyone has their own experience, but for me, it started my career.
With Whiplash, though, did you know that that was going to be your Whiplash? Did you know that that was going to be an impactful pivot in your career?
I was hoping it would be, but I did not know that it was going to be as successful as it was. I mean, I think I'm a member of American Cinema Editors, an honorary society of editors, and you can see the members in the credits for TV and movies because there's an acronym after the name ACE,
Right.
standing for American Cinema Editors. I mean, it's a prestigious organization, a group of like-minded film editors um, who do great work and strive to like raise the prestige level of editors everywhere around the world. I mean, I think my hope for Whiplash was that I would be invited to join that organization, which I was. But that's about as far as I
Oh, yeah.
sort of could see. I never thought that I'd be nominated or win a BAFTA or win an Academy Award. And I remember doing I can't remember what it was. I was interviewed for this Vietnamese TV show, and I can't remember what it was, but you know, back in the green room, I remember meeting a photographer who said that he said the same thing you said, which is like, you're the first Vietnamese American to win an Oscar or something. And he made a comparison. It was like the first, I think it was like I was the first to win an Oscar, and he mentioned, I think the photographer's Nick
Ooh.
Ut.
Yeah, Nick Ud. Yeah.
Nick Ut. Okay, yeah. So who was the first to win a Pulitzer, I
Pulitzer
think.
for, yeah.
Yeah. Which which I was embarrassed to be in the same conversation with Nick about Nick Ut. Like I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, thank you, I like, thank you for saying that. But I was like, to me, I was like, I'm just, that person is legendary, like that person's lived a life and had, is earned every accolade and he's like this legend. And I'm just some guy, who got lucky. And so, um, but but I think a big thing that I realized is like afterwards was, um, when I would see people after the awards and the awards, after parties and things like that. And I remember taking the Oscar to my favorite neighborhood restaurant, because the chef, I came in to get food once, and the chef said, I didn't, he didn't know I was nominated
Yeah.
or anything. Like I didn't know him that well, but I was a regular, and he stopped me. He's like, I saw you on TV, and you won. And I was like, oh, that's a great, thank you. And I was like, I'll bring it in, and I brought it in, and we took pictures. And what I realized is that, and of course, I took it home to New York to show my in-laws, and like this thing makes so many people happy, and my friends were so happy for me, and my family. I remember, my mother passed away in August of 2015, so not that long after I
Yeah.
won.
A few months
And
after.
yeah, and I feel so complete that she was able to live long enough to see that. Um, and yeah, I have such a positive experience. Like I said, it sort of made people happy in a way. And I start, this is where, I started, it invited more meditation on this stuff, because I remember getting messages, people on Facebook and other emails and other LinkedIn and other things from Vietnamese people who were reaching out to me. And this connects with what that person said, in that green room, talking about Nick Ut and stuff like that. Like just that, like in a way, it it was bigger than me, you know, bigger than it became a bigger thing. And I think that was really the first time I started thinking about representing,
Mm.
you know, what does that mean for what place do I have in that, you know, and where do I fit? And in a way, you know, like what is my responsibility? You know, I feel like I have a responsibility, you know, and
I
I have a
I, I
responsibility to
want to talk
represent.
about that responsibility. But before I talk about the responsibility, I want to finally say that it relieves me that we have had this conversation today, because I go everywhere telling people that we have Pulitzers on the podcast, we have Emmy winners, and then I go to and then I have to stop myself because there's never been an Oscar winner that has been on the podcast, because we don't have any. We don't have that many. I mean, there's you and Kiwe Kwan now,
Right.
but now I can proudly go out into the world and say, on the podcast, we've had Emmy winners, we've had Pulitzers, and now we have Oscar, you know, and Kiwe hopefully
Yeah.
will come on soon. But the responsibility is something that I wanted to ask you about. Have you
Yeah.
have you been back to Vietnam?
No, I've never been. I've never been. And that's something that it's always hard for me to say because I almost feel like I meet people um who it feels like would have no interest in going to Vietnam and they've been and I haven't been. Um, you know, it's something
It's like somebody going to the Bahamas, you know, and it's just
and
like,
they don't
yeah,
care.
they don't
Yeah,
care. Yeah.
exactly,
And you're like
exactly.
that. You're like,
Yeah, and it's very
here's
loaded for
tide.
me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you know, my wife and I, we were going to go. We had these plans to go, and of course, you know, when I was in high school and college, I always assumed that I would go back with my
Yeah.
parents someday. My parents never. Well, let me stop myself there. My mom never returned. When she left in '67, she never went back. My dad went back for work related stuff.
Wow.
What happened is like in 1980, which now is a long time ago, but in 1980, he was in Thailand on business. And because he was so close, he decided to make a trip there. And he made a trip there and made contact with family members who were still there, and he went to all the old places that he knew in Saigon in the 60s. And at that point, things were very different. You know, he took pictures. He took a lot of pictures when he was there in Saigon in the 60s. He took pictures sometimes from a similar vantage point in the 80s. And in the 80s, it was a very different place than what people describe today, of course, very different. In 1980, the
Dicey.
way I remember from his pictures and the way he would describe it, it was like Saigon, this bustling city, was like a ghost town with people wandering around looking like they had nothing to do. You know, this image that we have of Saigon as this bustling place in the 1960s that I mainly know through movies and
Yeah.
documentaries, where you see traffic circles and
Packed with
cyclos and
people.
mopeds filled to the brim with
Yeah.
Western advertising and stuff like that. All of that was whitewashed and gone. No Western advertising. Police carrying AK-47s, and just like a ghost town. But of course, you know, because you've been. I only know from what people tell me. It's a completely transformed place. But when I grew up, I was always expecting and hoping that I would go back, and especially go back with my mom, go back with both my parents. I just thought I would, and that ended up not happening. Um, and I don't feel too bad about that because for my mom and my dad, I don't know that it was a big priority of my
Right.
mom's. I mean, it was an important thing to me, but it wasn't something that it didn't feel like unfinished business for her. So I can kind of let myself off the hook a little bit in that way. But my wife and I were going to go like maybe a little more than 10 years ago. We had plans to go, and then we had a kid. And when you have little babies, like that sort of meant that we kicked any sort of trips down kick that can down the road. And so
Well,
we've yet to go, and we
if you,
will.
yeah, if you win and if you when you go, please let me know. And there's a lot of filmmakers in Vietnam that would love to hear your experience. There are many guys that film directors and producers that have and host these events for young filmmakers. And they're teaching at universities. They're spread out all over Vietnam, helping the Vietnamese film industry. So I could put out the word as soon as you let me know if you're
Absolutely.
heading back there. They would love to spend time with you. Many of them know who you are, and it would be phenomenal to have you back in the homeland.
I would love that. And that's the thing, is part of my journey, I think, is it's very, I mean, it's kind of ironic in a way, but now that my mom has passed, only now, with it's very interesting that milestone of winning, and then really realizing that this is bigger than me,
Yeah.
and in a way that there are people, for lack of a better way of looking at it, there are people who, you know, who look up to me, and certain people who, when they saw me win, that meant something to them. And like I said, that's bigger than me. But I do feel this, again, it's feeling that responsibility.
Yeah.
So ironically, as my mother has sort of passed and gone away, it's ironic to me and interesting to think that now I feel more of a pull to connect and to reconcile things that I didn't really think about before, and it's interesting, like, one of my favorite, my kids, their favorite food is getting pho.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah.
a kid, my mom would make pho for my dad, and he loved that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I would just have like a hot dog or something like that as a kid. Then as an adult, basically when I went to college, I started trying different foods and stuff like that. And that's where I gained a love for Vietnamese food. And so, but it's so funny
Changes.
it's like two ships passing on the
Yeah.
night in a way. Like I think of my mom and her influence, and certain things that we could have shared that we didn't really share, but yeah, so I think about like wanting to connect more. Maybe I feel it too, is because that, as my mom is gone and now the older generation sort of passes on, I sort of feel a little more clinging to things that are, that I used to take for granted in a way, or just assume that's always going to be there, or it's there in a complicated form. But now I feel like there are things I want to connect with and reconcile.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's interesting. My dad, American, he will, every sort of anniversary, he'll set up the altar, for my mom and
Oh.
family members, and it's the white guy setting up it's amazing.
Tom, thank you so much for coming on and spending the time with me today.
Yeah.
And like I said, we just scratched the surface today with the stories that you have, and I really look forward to the next time we get to sit down and do this.
Likewise, Ken, it's an honor to be asked and invited to speak with you. And you have so many eloquent people who think about this. What does it mean to be Vietnamese? What is that? People have a lot of deep thoughts about that. Yeah, it's these are amazing conversations. Like I said, it's an honor to even have this dialogue with you.
I want to say this, Minh Tâm, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.